Hi, my name is Evelyn Carter. And for a long time, I believed love meant staying quiet, staying small, and staying grateful. Even when the people you gave everything to made you feel like nothing. But one day, something inside me broke, and I stopped apologizing for taking up space. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about memory, dignity, and finally taking back the life I nearly gave away. If you've ever felt erased, replaced, or quietly pushed aside, this story is for you. Comment below. Have you ever been made to feel invisible? And tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Like, subscribe, and share. Because sometimes, the softest voices carry the loudest truths. There's a strange kind of silence that settles inside you when your heart breaks. Not loud, not messy, just still. That was the silence that found me at my grandson Michael's rehearsal dinner. It was held at a vineyard estate just outside town, the kind with soft string lights hung between cypress trees and linen napkins folded like origami swans. I had helped pay for the place, though no one mentioned that in the speeches. I arrived early, wearing my navy silk dress and the gold locket Henry gave me on our 30th anniversary, the one with his photo on one side, and a picture of Michael, as a toddler, on the other. I'd even curled my thinning hair, despite my arthritic shoulders aching with every lift of the iron. When I saw my son, Daniel, adjusting his tie near the head table, I smiled. I reached out to fix his boutonniere. The flower was drooping a little, just like I used to straighten his collars on picture day in elementary school. But he stiffened at my touch, just slightly, enough for me to notice. He leaned in, eyes still scanning the room, and whispered through clenched teeth, "Don't ruin this for us. Us. Not you. Not me and you. Us. As in, the real family. The ones who mattered tonight." I pulled my hand back, smiled tightly, and nodded. "Of course, sweetheart." I laughed it off, like mothers do. After all, he was probably just nervous. It was a big night. Everyone gets edgy when the spotlight's near. That's what I told myself. The evening went on. Toasts were made, by the groom's friends, his father, and even Lydia's aunt from Baltimore. But not me. Michael didn't ask me to speak. I'd practically raised him after his mother left. Changed his diapers, packed his lunches, stayed up with him during those long fevers. But I guess stories from childhood didn't match the elegant tone of the evening. When the waiters brought out dessert, I realized I'd been seated near the kitchen door, with the plus ones and the catering staff's grandparents, I suppose. I wasn't introduced to the bride's family. No one asked if I needed a ride home, and still, I smiled. I took tiny bites of the lemon tart and complimented the server on the lavender sprigs. It's what Henry would have done. Grace, no matter what. Later that night, I stood in my small condo, staring at the fridge. There, clipped under a magnet shaped like a tomato, was the invitation to the wedding. The envelope was still tucked behind it. No RSVP card. No handwritten note. Just a printed square of ivory cardstock. My name, Evelyn Carter, had been typed in the smallest font. I pulled it down and sat by the window. The night was cool. The neighbor's wind chime tinkled softly. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around me and remembered Daniel at age 6, running up the driveway with a construction paper card. To the best mommy in the universe. When did that little boy forget how to see me? I used to be everything. The sun, glue, the shelter, the heartbeat of our home. Now I was... what? An obligation in pearls? A name they included to avoid gossip? For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder, was this who I had become in their story? A background character? An afterthought? And even worse, had I let it happen and share? Because sometimes, the softest voices carry the loudest truths. The Weeks after the rehearsal dinner felt like watching a door slowly close. Not slammed in your face, but inched shut with quiet, polite force. At first, I brushed it off. Told myself I was imagining things. Everyone was just busy. Weddings are whirlwind affairs. People forget birthdays. It happens. But then I noticed the pattern. When I went for my routine checkup at the clinic, Lydia insisted on driving me. I thought it was kind, until we were in the room with the nurse, and Lydia spoke over me the entire time. "She's fine," she said with a small, sugary smile. "Nothing new. Just her usual arthritis and a little forgetfulness." Forgetfulness? Turned to say something, but the nurse had already nodded and scribbled down notes. Just like that, I wasn't a person anymore. I was a patient, a case, a subject of discussion, and not a participant in it. That weekend, I called Daniel and asked about Thanksgiving plans. I'd hosted it every year since his father passed. The tablecloth still had gravy stains from Michael's first-time carving. The turkey, he was 12 and proud as a peacock, but Daniel was curt. "We're doing something smaller this year, Mom. Just us. Lydia's family is coming over. You've done enough, okay? Just rest. Just rest." As if I was a piece of antique furniture, admired but not useful. I made Lydia her favorite lemon cake that week. Left it at their doorstep with a note. "Hope you're all doing well. Love, Mom." The plate was returned days later, still wrapped, still untouched. I kept trying. Groceries when I knew they were busy. A handmade sweater for my granddaughter. Soft lavender yarn, tiny pearl buttons, stitched with the same pattern I once used for her mother. She never wore it. I saw the photos from her birthday online. They were at a lake house somewhere. Matching outfits, family poses, smiling faces. I wasn't invited, not even a text. The silence wasn't loud. It was quiet and constant, like static humming behind every memory. My phone would only ring when someone needed something. A co-signed loan, help with daycare bills, access to old family documents. No one asked how I was sleeping. No one asked what I dreamed about. And then came the moment that broke whatever was left. I was visiting, bringing some books for Michael. He'd always loved mysteries. When I passed the hallway and heard Lydia's voice in the living room. "She's just old now," she said with a chuckle. "Everything's drama with her. I swear, if I have to hear about her lemon cake or her knitting one more time." I didn't move. I just stood there, clutching the paper bag of books. On top was a signed copy of a mystery novel I bought from a local author, one I thought Michael would treasure. I turned around, walked back to the front door, and let myself out. I don't even think they noticed. That night, I sat on my couch, wrapped in an old quilt I'd stitched during the early years of my marriage. Tiny, frayed corners but still warm. I scrolled through my phone and looked at all the messages I'd sent that went unanswered. "Let me know if you need anything. Thinking of you today. Brought some soup. It's on the porch." Nothing. Just blue bubbles floating in space. So I stopped calling. I stopped dropping off meals. I stopped offering rides, advice, or holiday hosting. I pulled the blinds closed earlier. I walked the garden path alone. I learned how long silence could stretch inside a person before it cracked something open. And in that stillness, I started hearing my own voice again. I remember the smell of rosemary and red wine filling the kitchen that morning. I'd risen, early, even before the sun touched the blinds, and started preparing the pot roast, the one Daniel used to request every year on his birthday. But this time, it was mine. My 78th, I set the table for 6. Real linens, not the paper napkins I usually used. I polished the old silverware, the ones with tiny vines etched into the handles, and placed my wedding china at each seat like little whispers of memory. Part of me knew they wouldn't come. I hadn't heard from them in days. No, what time should we arrive? No casual hint that they were baking a cake or picking up balloons. Still, I hoped. I always hoped. I placed the roast in the center of the table just after 5. Candles, lit. Glasses shined. At 6:15, I told myself traffic was probably bad. At 7, I imagined they were wrapping presents. At 7:45, I convinced myself they were planning some grand surprise. At 8:17, my phone buzzed. Just once, a text from Daniel. "Sorry, Mom, we forgot it was today. Been crazy busy. Rain check? No call, no visit, not even flowers." I read the words over and over again until the screen dimmed. My hand didn't tremble. My eyes didn't water. Not yet. I stood up and walked slowly to my bedroom. The roast was still steaming, the chairs still waiting. At my vanity, I sat and looked at the mirror. My hair was curled, pinned neatly just like Henry used to love it. The pearl earrings he gave me on our 40th anniversary glinted in the warm lamplight. But the woman looking back, she looked tired. Not just from the years, but from the way they'd hollowed her out, little by little. A kind of erosion you don't notice until something important disappears. Like birthdays. Like worth. When did I stop being someone they celebrated? Someone they loved. Not for what I could give or pay for or fix, but simply for being who I was? I didn't cry. I just sat there. The silence was so loud it felt like another presence in the room. My hand reached almost instinctively for the top drawer, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a brass key. Old. Heavy. A little rusted around the teeth. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled down the fireproof lockbox. Henry's lockbox. We kept everything important in it. Insurance, deeds, marriage license, and old letters sealed with wax. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. Sitting cross-legged, on the floor, I turned the key. The hinges creaked like they were waking from a long sleep. And there, tucked neatly beneath the manila folders, was a thick envelope with my name in Henry's handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. It read, "For when you need to remember who you are." Inside were 3 things. First, an updated version of his will, dated 2 years before his death. It listed not only our assets, but protections. Trusts I'd never activated, clauses I'd forgotten. Legal safeguards made for me, because he knew, even back then, that the world doesn't treat aging women kindly. Second, a small photograph. Me and Henry in our 20s, standing in front of the first house we bought. He was grinning, arms wrapped around me. I was barefoot on the porch steps, holding up the keys like a trophy. My smile could have split the sky. And third, a letter, folded twice, written in blue ink. His handwriting was a little shaky, but unmistakably his. "If you're reading this, Evie, something's broken, and I'm not there to help you fix it. But you've always been the strong one, even when you didn't feel it. Don't let them dim your light. Not for tradition, not for guilt, not even for blood. Reclaim what's yours. You built this life. You still own it." I closed the letter and rested it on my lap. And finally, I cried. Not for them. Not for the birthday. Not even for me. I cried for the version of myself I had abandoned, piece by piece, trying to stay needed, trying to stay liked, trying to stay small enough to fit inside the spaces they left me. But Henry saw me. He remembered. And now, so did I. I didn't sleep that night. After reading Henry's letter, I sat in the living room, wrapped in my old shawl, the lamp beside me casting soft gold across the coffee table. I laid out every document from the lockbox in careful rows. Deeds, wills, tax forms, hand-scrawled notes Henry made on legal pads. His handwriting had always tilted to the right, sharp and confident. One sheet caught my eye. A revised clause, in the will, dated just a few months before his diagnosis. It was subtle, easily overlooked, but unmistakably clear. The transfer or division of property, stocks, or income derived from marital holdings shall not proceed without Evelyn's direct written consent and presence. Direct. Written. Presence. 3. Words that felt like armor. It was his way of protecting me, of making sure I could never be quietly written out of the life we built. But protection means nothing if you don't know it's there. And I hadn't known. I'd let the paperwork sit unopened for years, trusting my son to handle it. Trusting that family, especially your own child, would never betray what's sacred. But something about that birthday text, that sharp little crack in the mirror, made me curious, cautious. So I started digging. Slowly. Quietly. Old bank. Statements were still organized in Henry's accordion folder, labeled by year. I pulled the past 2 years' worth and sat at the kitchen table with a highlighter and my reading glasses. Most of it looked normal. Utilities, pension, dividends from our stocks. But then I found a wire transfer from our joint account. A large one, made out to LC Holdings. I didn't recognize the name, but something about it felt familiar. I went online and typed the company into the Property Records website. And there it was. The Maplewood duplex, the one Henry and I had bought 20 years ago as a rental, was no longer in my name. It had been transferred 6 months ago. To Lydia. I stared at the screen. My heart was beating like it did the night Henry had his first chest pains, fast and cold and far away. The record showed a notarized power of attorney. My name, my signature, my supposed consent. But I'd never signed that form. I hadn't even known the property was gone. The document had been backdated. And the notary? Lydia's cousin. I remembered now. She worked in a title office. It was all right there, quiet, clean, and clinical. They hadn't stolen from me with a crowbar. They'd done it with a printer and a pen. My name was being erased, gently, piece by piece. I didn't scream. I didn't storm over to their house. Printed every page, stapled them carefully, and put them in a folder. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the number I hadn't called in years. Bernstein Law, a woman's voice answered. "This is Evelyn Carter," I said. "I need to speak with Harold." There was a pause. "He's retired, but his son, David, now runs the firm." I closed my eyes. "Then give me David. Tell him it's urgent." The office hadn't changed much. Same dark wood paneling, same smell of old leather and ink. David Bernstein looked a lot like his father. Bushy brows, warm eyes, and a soft patience in the way he let people finish their sentences. I laid out the papers across his desk. My hands didn't shake. He read everything in silence. Occasionally he nodded. Once, he scribbled something in the margin. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Mrs. Carter, this is forgery, fraud, Elder Financial, abuse, and it's not subtle." I nodded. He hesitated. "Do you want to fight back?" I looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window, a bird was building a nest in the crook of a tree. The wind stirred the branches gently, not violently, just enough to be felt. I thought of the wedding china, still boxed up in Lydia's basement. The gold-rimmed plates she once said were too formal for modern tables. I thought of the garnet earrings Henry gave me for our 25th anniversary. Lydia told me they were outdated and had been quietly passed over when my granddaughter asked for jewelry. I thought of the smile Daniel gave me as he pulled out my chair at the rehearsal dinner, the same smile he now used to excuse me from his life. Yes, I said softly, quietly, but absolutely. David smiled, not with pity, with respect. Then let's begin. Revenge isn't always a scream. Sometimes it's a sigh, long and slow, as you exhale years of silence. After that meeting with David Bernstein, something inside me shifted. Not like a thunderclap. More like a tide turning. The kind you don't notice until the shore looks unfamiliar, and you realize you've drifted far from where they left you. For the first time in years, I woke up with purpose. Opened the desk drawer in my study, the one with the old fountain pens, dried notebooks, and yellowed stamps. And I began to write. Not legal papers, not grocery lists or birthday cards they never acknowledged. Real writing. At first it was shaky. I wrote about Henry, about Michael as a boy, about what it felt like to raise a family and slowly disappear inside it. I wrote poems about dust and about the sound of a door not being opened for you. I joined a senior writing circle at the local library. Every Tuesday, we'd sit in the sunlit room beside the stacks, and I'd read my work aloud. And they clapped. Not because it was brilliant, but because it was me. That's when I started reclaiming myself, piece by piece. I walked by the ocean, again like I used to in my 30s. I let the wind pull back my thinning hair and didn't wear the practical hat Lydia insisted on. I bought myself a coffee and sat barefoot on the bench, toes curling in the sand. I didn't feel old that day. I felt alive. David handled the legal work swiftly and discreetly. He helped me establish a private trust, one that bypassed Daniel and Lydia entirely. The assets that remained were transferred into my control. What they thought they'd quietly inherited was now locked away, secured under my name, and sealed by my signature alone. We rewrote my will. It wasn't bitter, just clean, clear, poetic almost. I left scholarships in Henry's name, a donation to the community garden I loved. The house, if not sold, would go to a women's shelter as transitional housing, but most importantly, I reclaimed my voice. I wore my gold watch again. The one Henry gave me after his first big bonus, the one Lydia called too chunky and cheap-looking. I wore it like armor. I pulled the old garnet earrings from my jewelry box, wore them to brunch, let them catch the light like they did the day Henry slid them into my hand across the Thanksgiving table. And still, no one noticed. Not even at the rehearsal dinner for my great-granddaughter's christening. I hadn't expected to be invited, but I showed up anyway. Sat in the back. Quiet. Alone. Daniel stood at the front and raised a glass. "To the real pillars of our family," he said, grinning at Lydia's parents, who smiled like royalty. I smiled too. Just a little. The kind of smile that doesn't seek recognition. Only resolution. Because I knew what was coming. They didn't. The house was already listed. The documents were filed. The final transfers were waiting in envelopes, sealed and ready. Revenge. Wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be correct. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt powerful. Not because I was taking anything from them, but because I had finally, quietly, taken myself back. I hadn't planned to speak. In fact, I wasn't even on the seating chart. They placed me at a table near the restrooms, as far as possible from the head table, tucked behind a column of hydrangeas tall enough to block me from view. I didn't mind. Not anymore. I'd learned by now that visibility in their world came only when they needed something. Otherwise, I was decor. Pleasant, quiet, and aging gracefully in the background. But the woman I used to be, the one they thought had faded away, had returned. It was Michael's wedding, and everything looked perfect. crystal glasses, catching candlelight, a string quartet playing Vivaldi near the floral arch, Lydia in an icy blue gown that shimmered every time she turned to accept another compliment. I watched my son, Daniel, glide through the crowd, laughing, shaking hands. He looked at me once, nodded politely. The kind of nod you give an old teacher or a polite neighbor, not your mother. Then came the toasts. Lydia's father spoke first. Daniel followed. Then the maid of honor. The best man. Each speech filled with charming memories and elegant jokes. But no mention of the woman who helped raise Michael while his parents were too busy climbing ladders and chasing promotions. No nod to the bedtime stories, the packed lunches, the late-night fevers I nursed, while Lydia posted vacation selfies. I sipped my water, placed my napkin gently on the table, and stood. People noticed. Slowly. Heads turned. A quiet hush fell over the room, like the kind that precedes a storm no one saw coming. I walked toward the microphone, calm, composed, not rushed, not angry, just ready. The MC looked at me, confused. I gave him a small nod, and he stepped aside. Cleared my throat. Before dessert, I said, steady as ever, I'd like to say a few words. The microphone buzzed faintly. Somewhere in the back, a fork clinked against a plate. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the manila folder, the one David Bernstein helped me organize. I didn't open it. I simply held it. Simple enough. I just wanted to share some family news, I continued. As of yesterday, the home you all grew up in, the one with the magnolia tree and the swing Henry built, has been sold. A ripple of surprise swept across the crowd. Lydia froze mid-sip. Daniel's hand, resting on the back of her chair, clenched slightly. It now belongs to a lovely couple, I said. Professors of music at the university. Newlyweds, full of hope and harmony. I smiled. Not smugly, not bitterly, just peacefully. And the proceeds? I said. They're going into a scholarship fund, for children who remember where they came from. Gasps, murmurs, a few scattered. Claps from distant cousins who had been watching it all unfold for years but never said a word. Lydia was pale. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. I wasn't done. I've also updated my will, I said softly, but firmly. Completely. I figured it was time to stop giving gifts to people who think of me as a burden. Silence. Beautiful, crisp silence. I stepped back, handed the microphone to the MC, and returned to my seat. The candlelight flickered gently across the rim of my water glass. There were no screams, no begging, no apologies, just a quiet room full of faces who had written me out, now realizing the final chapter belonged to me. 3 years passed quietly, like the final pages of a well-loved novel. No fanfare, no grand send-off, just warmth and closure, softly turning one season into the next. I live by the coast now, in a cottage with wide windows that catch the morning light just right, and creaky floorboards that sing a little when the wind comes off the ocean. The first time I walked through it, I remember touching the chipped paint on the doorframe and whispering, "This is mine, not inherited, not borrowed, not gifted out of pity. Mine." These days, I volunteer at the local senior center. We run weekly writing circles for women who feel, as I once did, forgotten. We call ourselves the Second Bloom Club. We meet on Tuesdays, just after lunch. We sip tea and pass around little slips of folded paper, poems, memories, letters never sent. Women read their truths aloud, some trembling, some weeping, and then silence, sacred silence, the kind that comes when someone has finally been heard. I don't teach, I just listen. And every time someone says, "I didn't know I still had something worth saying," I smile, because I remember how it felt. My granddaughter, sweet Emily, the only one who ever made room beside her without being told, visits often. She brings lavender scones and hand-drawn bookmarks and stories from college. "Grandma," she said last week, pressing her forehead to mine, "I'm proud of you. I didn't cry. But something inside me grew roots deeper than any grief I'd known. Last Thursday, I received a letter in the mail. I recognized the handwriting instantly. The sharp angles, the hurried loops. Lydia. It wasn't an apology. Just a single page, neatly folded. "We didn't realize what we were doing. I hope you're well." I held it between my fingers for a long moment. Then I walked out to the garden, sat on the stone bench Henry once carved our initials into, and struck a match. The paper curled, blackened, and lifted into the wind like ash from a memory I no longer needed to hold. Not out of spite, but out of freedom. Because I don't need their recognition anymore. I don't need an invitation, a table setting, or a birthday text to know my worth. I have my voice back. I have my dignity. I have peace. And that is more valuable than anything I ever signed over.